So we're not going to talk about guns and gun control. We're going to talk about...
Well, we are going to talk about specifically what the most recent school massacre has taught us about our rights as individuals. Now, this is the kind of story that I've been circling around and trying to figure out, do I have something to say about this? What does it... The solutions are not easy, right? And so I want to collectively have this conversation and open it up to what you have to say, while also making it clear what I think that the rest of us need to understand about our rights as Americans. Because over the weekend, more details emerged about the school shooting in Uvalde, Texas. And I just want to highlight how powerless this has left us all, and what we need to realize that the government does have. Well, I think what we should realize, right, collectively, is that the government does not have to protect us, but we do have to protect them from liability and accountability. So if you consider this, in Uvalde, Texas, the school district recently doubled its security budget and equipped police with extensive firepower, body armor, and other military equipment, right? But they didn't use it because they don't have to. Did you know this? This is new to me. So we can all debate about ways to give the good guys more guns, but does the debate change if they are not obliged to use it? I'm going to explain this later, but first I want to talk about how the government has more protection than civilians do. Now, according to recent reports, a student inside the 4th grade classroom with a shooter called 911 several times. Go to number 2, please. Between the times of 12:03 and 12:47. This means that for over 40 minutes, 10-year-olds were alive to be terrorized as they watched their peers die. Now, video from outside the school shows parents absolutely freaking out, trying to get to their children, in some cases being restrained by law enforcement because they could not get in. Now, today, the head of the Texas Department of Public Safety, Stephen McCraw, told the Associated Press that the police did not go in because the shooter, they thought, might be holding children hostage. And even though they did hear gunfire in the classroom, they said it was sporadic. Now, look at this last quote here from McGraw. He says, "It was the wrong decision."
Wait, so you don't go in because the gunfire was sporadic? So it was like, oh, I didn't hear him. I heard some gunfire. It wasn't enough for me to like go in.
Yes.
like, I'm sorry, isn't
ignoring? Sorry, I was gonna say that's ignoring the fact that once there's a shot fired, it has ceased to be a hostage situation. And it is now an active shooter situation. There's just a single bullet because they don't know what happened. At that point, you have an active shooter, not a hostage situation.
But
Yes.
it's sporadic, so we just don't know. We thought, I don't know.
Right. Okay. So this admission here, it was the wrong decision. Like, I read it and I thought, well, that's an admission, right? This is an admission in and of itself that screams lawsuit to me. They left 10-year-olds inside a bloody nightmare. Shouldn't somebody be punished? Shouldn't the school district and the police department owe someone punitive damages? Now, I know this will never make it right, but shouldn't someone answer for this so as to deter future departments from behaving this way, reacting this way, right? The answer is not likely because in Texas, the law that protects the school and the police is called sovereign immunity. Sovereign immunity dates back to English common law. It comes from the notion that the king can do no wrong. Did you know this?
No, I didn't.
The king can do no wrong. Does anyone want to respond to that while I pause for a second?
Oh, the king. No, come on. The king always, I mean, like Elvis, you can't do any wrong. The king always is right. Or isn't that right?
Okay, but why are we extending this to governments? When we have a social contract that we have to behave in a way that they tell us to, but they don't have an obligation to us. The king can do no wrong.
Well, this is the way it's always been.
To quote from Braveheart, an assault on the king's guards is the same as an assault on the king himself. Isn't that what the whole idea is? Like the police represent the government, so if you they have the same immunity as everyone else that's rich.
Yes.
Right. Well, I mean, look, when President Biden showed up today, right? He went there on this visit, and obviously a lot of discussions about guns, but who's all there protecting him? They all have guns. Like every one of the federal agents who's there protecting him, they're all armed to the hilt, right?
Yes. But do they have an obligation to use those guns? Is it different than the obligation to civilians? Let's put a pin in that. Okay. But why, first of all, is there this king can do no wrong law in Texas, especially in schools? Well, Texas courts have said that there are two reasons this should apply to school. First, if you're suing a school, you would be exercising your personal opinions, and your personal interests do not outweigh those of the school. So say you sue because you don't agree with a budget decision. Well, the school can't then change course to please that parent that sues over the collective. That makes sense, right? The school has to maintain sovereignty. But the second reason is to shield the public from the cost and consequences of imprudent actions of their government. So if a school makes the wrong decision, which we have an admission of now on behalf of the police department, according to the law, well, then taxpayers would have to pay the price of defending or fixing that behavior. So we can't have that, right? So economically, that makes sense, which means that our social contract is that we agree that there's no recompense from these government departments, right?
Right.
The same sovereign immunity now applies to the police. So police can just get it wrong and no one will hold them accountable. But if you have a party on your private property and people get hurt, you will be held accountable. So there are no laws to protect you from getting it wrong, but there are many to protect the government from getting wrong. Now I ask you, and I'll open this up to the floor. Jackson, if you want to take this, please. Is that right? Is it right that the government has civil protection from litigation that civilians do not?
Well, it's I hear you, break down that law, and it's just so infuriating because I think back to 2008 and the financial crisis. It's like, okay, well, we saw a mass failure in some of our biggest industries. And who paid the brunt for that? It was average working class Americans who bailed out all those companies at the behest of the government. But I do believe that as a law enforcement officer, I have a lot of family who are in law enforcement and have had very close calls and almost losing their lives. It's scary, and you do have to be able to exert a certain level of decision making that's supposed to be informed based upon the rules that your department has set about. But at the end of the day, it is your job to save those students' lives once that first shot rings out. And as you mentioned, it didn't happen for about 40, 50 minutes until an off-duty Border Patrol agent ran in and stopped what was going on. So this is the price you have to pay, and everyone who serves knows that you are putting your life on the line, and that's why you are given that level of immunity if you do make a mistake.
Well, actually, you don't have to save lives.
Right. Isn't that the big question?
This is what the Supreme Court ruled in 2005, and I'm going to get to that in a second because you should I think most law enforcement would and does and often saves lives,
yeah, they
right?
run into burning buildings on 9/11,
Absolutely, right. But is it their duty, right? So these people who failed to save children, did they shirk their duty or was that never their duty? Now, a trial lawyer said this to the New York Daily News. He said, as sad as this is, it's probably right for police to have this protection. We don't want them to be second guessing themselves moment by moment and worrying about getting sued every time they make the wrong choice. And so this is a question that I'm sort of, like I said, circling like a lion. Don't we though? Isn't that why body cams are so popular? Because we do want some accountability. We do want them to say, I better not get this wrong, because I could be litigated, someone could die, I could be shamed on social media, right? Those are all deterrents. I'm not saying definitely that's the case, but I don't think that is a foregone conclusion. The only thing that lawyers say may be worth a case is if these parents who were restrained from getting to their children could prove that preventing them from getting to their child resulted in harm to the child, which is a maybe, right? Each of the victims will have a time of death called by the coroner. So could a parent prove that they otherwise could have saved the child? I do know that this is a heavy on litigation as the solution, but I actually am someone who's been dragged through litigation as a plaintiff and a defendant, and I miraculously still do believe in the courts, mostly. I do not think lawmakers are going to make any law that changes the probability of further shootings like this, but I do think that litigation could, but obviously not if the law has been written to preclude litigation for the government's advantage. Now, I want to get to Jackson's point about how it is your job to protect someone if you are in law enforcement, because actually this is something that has come to the forefront through this case, is that they are not in a violation for not using all of those guns that the district just gave them. There is a Supreme Court case for this. In 2005, a woman sued police for failing to protect her and her 3 children from her ex-husband. She warned the police that he was violating his restraining order, and she called them to help when he kidnapped the children. The police did not help. He killed all 3 of those children and then showed up at the police station with a gun in hand. And only then did police actually kill him. The woman sued the police department for violating her right to equal protection, and the case did go all the way to the Supreme Court. And the court decided that there was, this is a direct quote from Justice Alito, there's no entitlement to receive protective services. So another man in New York similarly sued because he was being stabbed repeatedly in front of police officers by a serial killer that police were actually looking for. He lost his case because the courts ruled that he had, this is quote, no special duty to act. So this has changed a little bit with the George Floyd murder. The police who stood by while an officer choked him to death are now being held accountable. So in some states, there's law that says that police have a duty to intervene if a fellow officer is harming someone, but they still don't have a duty to get involved in the first place. Again, here I want to acknowledge many heroic people that would intervene, many who do every day, many heroic police. But there is also a lot of people who are just not qualified to go into a war zone because they were hired to protect a school, right? They can receive all the guns they want and high-tech gear, but they don't have to use it. Did you know this?
No, but I mean, I do know about the statistics about the school security guards, the police, the 10,000 that have been hired since we've had this active shooter situation, and of those 10,000, not one of them has ended up killing, if I'm not mistaken, according to the statistics I read yesterday. Not one of them has actually stopped an active shooter. So all these schools have all of these new police.
Yes.
And what has it actually gotten us? I saw another statistic today about 95% of all schools, this is according to the New York Times, 95% of all schools in the United States now have secure active shooter drills as a point of pride. It's like, that's a point of pride?
Yeah.
Like, this is something where, you know, it's like what you get scared about hearing, like the bomb threats of the 1950s, like hiding under your desk. Like, thank God we don't have to do that anymore, right?
Yeah.
And now, like, oh yeah, we're good. We're good to go for active shooters. Like, this is what it's come to.
Right. Well, consider the case from Sergeant Brian Miller from the Broward County Sheriff's Department. He was fired after an investigation showed that he hid in his car during the 2018 Parkland, Florida shooting. He sued, and the case went to arbitration, and the arbiter found that the department violated his right to due process when they fired him, and he was rehired 2 years later with back pay. So this is our social contract, right? The police in the school district are protected from litigation in ways that civilians are not. Police can be given all manner of military gear, but they don't have to use it. They have no legal obligation to use it, right? So as Caitlin Johnstone said in her newsletter this week, she said, we're watching an entire country learn that it's not actually cops' jobs to save anyone or risk any danger. The only reason they assumed otherwise was because of movies and TV shows. I find that a bit reductive because, like you said, we have all sorts of heroic stories from 9/11. Police and fire department, they do save people, but it is not their obligation. So I think that this just makes it more clear to me that the government's obligation is to protect itself, not us. Now, you may think to yourself, oh, this is even more reason to have a gun because the police can have guns, but they don't have to use it. At least I would, right? But consider the father of this little girl, that he had a gun in his truck, but he left the gun there with his vehicle running when he heard there was a school shooting and went running in when he heard that his daughter was in danger, because statistics show that the likeliness of getting to your gun in a time of crisis is less than 10%. We are not trained to be like John Wick, whether we own a gun or not. And this is actually, Clayton doesn't like when I say this, but even John Wick is not John Wick when he's caught asleep, right?
Well, yeah, his puppy gets killed. I mean,
Yeah, when you're
know what
asleep with the
happens.
puppy, like you
Yeah.
can't always be John Wick, right?
Exactly. And so even if you're armed to the teeth and you're a school security guard and there's 10,000 of you, hey, if the doors are unlocked,
Yeah.
you're not ready for it. This is what happens. As Grim said in our chat, maybe the active shooter drills that are in these schools should include actively shooting the shooter. Like maybe that would,
I mean, that itself makes me extremely uncomfortable. I think that in presenting this information, I want to just point out that it's full of conundrums. And it's too hard of a problem to just yell on Twitter about gun control. But I also think that it's just crazy how a civilian can be dragged into a litigation for anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is America.
I
But
know
we
you wanted to
cannot protect, but we're not protected by law enforcement, but they are.
And I know you wanted to keep it kind of focused on that, which is great. My sort of head in all of this goes to the hypocrisy. I always sort of, everyone immediately draws their lines, right, Jackson? Like on social media, it's like you're going to have the liberals are going to jump right to gun control. Then conservatives are going to say it's not about gun control doesn't work, and I'm going to stock up on more guns. It's about culture. Like these are the battle lines that are always drawn. And then I go someplace else, which is I'm like, we have these discussions where we have the nation comes together with memorials and flowers on the front porches of all of this stuff. And yet America has this like history of invading other countries, like a murderous regime but they're fine with that. Like they're able to like look beyond that. And I like how Caitlin Johnstone said it this week. She said, has America tried bombing its mass shooter problem? Like maybe so we're very good at bombing things. Maybe if we bombed our mass shooting problem, we would actually solve this.
Yeah, I think it was Thomas Massey who at the start of the arms shipments over to Ukraine said, I'm happy to see my liberal counterparts in the House of Representatives finally recognize the importance of the Second Amendment, but
Right.
they only recognize it in Ukraine, apparently.
Right. Wasn't he the only one voting against it? Yeah. I think he was the only one.
He's had a perfect record voting against all those Ukraine bills and everything like that. But the one thing I want to say here about the shooting that I found so interesting, I didn't even know this. Jimmy Dore was talking about this, the fact that in the official press conference for this shooting, the head sheriff was discussing the fact that, and you guys may have covered this already, that the sheriffs no longer recognize the situation as an active shooter situation during the midst of it. And they said it was the shooter had barricaded himself in the school building, meaning they thought that presumably all the children had been killed in the classroom already, while they still had 14 cops outside of the classroom itself, and they weren't going in yet. And it wasn't until the Border Patrol officer came in and said, does anyone need help? Scream if you need help. And a girl did that, and then they heard more shooting. But I mean, I just find it so interesting, like from the start of this segment where you pointed out that they had admitted fault, and then you also have now the admission that they miscalculated the fact that it was no longer an active shooter situation. You have all these things that line up, all this admission of guilt, but no one's probably going to be reprimanded for this. No one's going to be, discharged or anything like that. It's just kind of crazy how that can happen.
Yeah, and I think your point about like the financial crisis, like these people in power, they're protected, right? And you look at Iceland, what happened during the financial crisis. I think they rewrote their whole freaking constitution as a result of it. And to think that no one will be in trouble, no one's going to be reprimanded, there'll be no change. You'll see more people coming out saying, thoughts and prayers, and then we'll go back. We'll forget it like a week later. Like this is going to happen. Like another one happened yesterday. There was another mass shooting yesterday. Like it's going to happen over and over and over again. Until Russell Brand talked about like culture and the changing of the culture. It's like, well, if you're, I don't know, how do you change a culture of a country right now that's eating itself alive? I mean, it's going to take a lot of years. I mean, I don't know how we do it. And this is the discussion I'm more curious about rather than the sort of the battle lines. You know, I mean, how do you change the culture? I know you can do it on a YouTube show. I don't know. And I know Natalie's been like every day, like when we look at these stories, she's been like crying about it. Like, and she sits there and reads these every like little nuance about these families. And it's like, what?
I can't, like, the idea, I have a 10-year-old too, you know, and I can't stop thinking like one of them could have had a phone and be calling for help, and the timestamp is there, you know, like they're telling you that they're in trouble. And I'm haunted by this guy who, I'm sure you saw the clip of the dad who was a EMT first responder and came out, and the little girl is like, he shot my best friend, and it ended up being his kid. And I feel this story is like a dementor over the whole country, and I don't know how anybody, you know, decides that this social contract is acceptable, but I don't know which piece of it needs to crumble before children are safe.
I remember sitting there. I remember sitting there in New Jersey. I was eating tacos a number of years ago, and up on the TV pops the story about Sandy Hook.
Yeah,
and I was like, how do you go on from this? Like, how do you go on from? And they did, and more of it happened, and it happened over again. And these politicians, you know, I don't know. It's just a continual cycle.
I didn't know that piece that Jackson just brought up about like one little girl screamed and every detail that I get, it should hurt all of us like this, you know.
Yeah, we're so.
There's nothing. Every single piece of it, you know, just it cuts me. It should cut all of us. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the problem,
the worst part that I didn't even know of before I started looking at the timestamps too was that the shooting didn't start at the school. The shooting started after
at a funeral home.
The kid crashed his car, into a ditch, and then started shooting at the funeral home. That was like 20 minutes before he even got to the school. How does it take that long in a small town where I'm assuming there's probably not a lot of crime, probably well-staffed sheriff's department, for cops to get to an active shooter situation when the funeral home calls the police and tells them that the shooter is headed towards the school? It's insane.
Yeah.
Philip, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think part of the problem is because politically, I'm not blaming the right for this, but I'm saying the right specifically has tied themselves to guns, to babies, and to Jesus. And so that becomes their political mantra. And so in doing so, when something like this happens, it's automatically divisive. So we can't actually have a conversation about it because it's automatically a divisive issue. That it's part of the guns, Jesus, and babies argument, you know? So it's like it falls into that guns thing. So they've done such a good job of branding themselves as being like, these are the things we stand for, that when something like this happens, we can't have a legitimate conversation and go anywhere because it's that cognitive dissonance where it's like, rather than convincing anybody of something, they're automatically dug in. So it's just like we're just stuck in that.
Right, because then you start throwing out the alternatives here. Then you start saying, okay, well, there's the story out of Australia, right? And this was passed around all over the place today, and which is about Australia banning guns. What happened? Vox Media had a piece about Australia and banning guns, and now if I can find it, where was it? And it was about how they banned when they confiscated the guns, they got like 650,000 guns. And in the article, it has a guy like sitting on a big pile of the guns and how they did it. All of their like murders plummeted and suicides plummeted because a huge chunk of all of these shootings actually is suicides in the United States. It's not even actual murders of other people. And so
actually, you're right. That's 40%.
Yeah. So suicides and mass shootings and all of this stuff plummeted. Okay, so then you throw that out on the table. And then you're right, Philip. Then these lines are drawn where, well, it's Second Amendment, so it just shuts down the conversation. Second Amendment in the United States, so don't even talk to me. Well, then do you layer on top of that? Do you layer on top of that laws and background checks? And then, well, does that take away your Second Amendment rights? Because now you're layering on top of this constitutional rights right there. It's Second Amendment. You can't touch it, right?
But ironically, the Second Amendment is supposed to protect our ability to rise up to a government, which we cannot do with guns, right? That would be shut down. And so, again, the Second Amendment is meant to give us a right to tap out of a government we don't like, when really that is not our right. And you can't even move abroad and tap out of this government. If you do that, you still have to pay taxes.
Right. When people say, because, we moved abroad a number of years ago, and people are like, how can you comment on the United States? Well, first of all, you get the opposite, right? It's like, how did you abandon it? It's like, well, no, I left for a reason. I didn't want to be a part of that anymore. But, well, then how can you comment on it? Well, hey, guess what? 40% of everything I own or make goes to the United States government. Like, all of my money in taxes still goes to the U.S. government.
So we get to say, yeah.
And by the way, even if it didn't, who the hell cares? Like, you can't comment on a country you know a lot about. Like, you're just not allowed to talk about it now because you're not there anymore. That makes no sense. So then I couldn't talk about anything because I'm not in Russia right now. I'm not in Ukraine right now. I'm not on Mars. I can't talk about UFOs. I can't talk about anything. I can only talk maybe about my house. I could do a news report about my house, like
no, you can't.
What's happening with my dog. And so, it's ridiculous, right? So 40% of all my money goes to that, and it goes to guns, or it goes to weaponizing our police forces. It goes to invading other countries. That's where my money goes.
Not guns. Where we live, we're not allowed them.
Right. I mean, you're not allowed it. So. Is it a unique issue right now? In the United States, there's mass shootings that happen in some other countries that don't get a lot of press, but it's incredibly frustrating. The conversation immediately gets drawn, and there's no intelligent conversation happening because so much money is at play with the gun lobby and the political activist committees that run Washington. Just shut down the conversation, so you can't talk about it. It's frustrating. I feel like I need a shower after that.
Yeah. I hope that we did not present that as like, here are the solutions, because we do not have any. But there's a strong social contract here that we all have, and it's our right to just feel like we do not like it. Well,
let me just finish it by saying this. I grew up in Philadelphia, in the Philadelphia area. I mean, I follow a friend of mine, Steve Keeley, from my old news station, Fox 29 in Philadelphia. He's a great reporter. And every day on his Twitter feed, there's another shooting in this part of Philadelphia, He literally, it's like every day, that's his Twitter feed, is this murder that just happened in Philadelphia today. On and on and on. It's children, it's elderly people, it's just all manner of violence. And that's just one city. I mean, let's talk about Chicago and Los Angeles and all over the country. So this one mass shooting happens, but it's happening constantly. And talk about talk about the opioid deaths in the United States and the amount of people that are dying because of that. So we've got an absolute
culture in decline.
Yeah. I mean, it's like a country eating itself right now. And it's really, really, it's just terrible to watch. It's like it's unfolding right before our eyes. I don't know, Jackson, when you look at all these stories every day, I've been in the news business now, 23 years as a journalist. I mean, there's weekends where I just I can't do it. I can't look at it because it eats your stomach alive. And I don't know, have you experienced that looking at all these stories on a regular basis? And it's just hard.
Yeah. I mean, I live in downtown Los Angeles, so
wow.
I'm in the thick of it, right? Like, last week, the coffee shop I go to, a guy got shot out right in front of the coffee shop, 3 p.m., broad daylight.
Oh, my goodness.
It's insane what we're living through. And you're right that we don't have the answers. It's just it's a culture in decay, and there's much bigger problems that I think are causing all of this that the ruling class in this country doesn't want to solve. They want to exacerbate, and they are exacerbating. And, we see other cultures, other countries which don't have this problem, and they don't have the broad problems that are, I think, at the roots of them. And that's what distinguishes us from them.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Thank you so much for subscribing to our channel. We've been banned, we've been blocked, we've been censored. That's why we started our own website, to stay connected with you for free.
That's right. So head on over to redacted.inc and make sure you're connected with us. You can sign up again at redacted.inc, not .com.